Well, welcome to the Chesapeake Bay Journal newscast. This is the show where reporters from the Bay Journal wade into the biggest environmental news impacting the Bay and beyond. I'm your host, Jeremy Cox. Let's dive into it. Well, we're glad you're here, and with us today, besides me, as always, is our Virginia reporter, Lauren Hines-Acosta. Hello, Lauren.
Hey y'all.
And of course, coming to us from Pennsylvania, we have Karl Blankenship with us. Hey, Karl.
Hello.
All right. Well, we've got a lot to talk about today, so let's quick jump to our ad here, and we'll meet you back on the other side of it.
Hi, I'm Susan Shinkeldecker, CEO of Chesapeake Conservancy. We're the only watershed-wide organization focused on both land conservation and stream restoration to achieve a healthier Chesapeake Bay. Using groundbreaking data and technology, we help the conservation movement focus efforts where they will have the greatest impact. For more information, visit chesapeakeconservancy.org and follow us on social media. Thanks for caring about the Chesapeake Bay and for listening to Chesapeake Bay Journal Newscast.
Hey, welcome back to the Chesapeake Bay Journal newscast. That was a word from the Chesapeake Conservancy, and we wanted to thank them for supporting what we do here. The first thing that we've got to talk about is our biggest story we have going on right now. That's the Bay's big wave. And Karl, looks like you drew the short straw. You just finished a story about sturgeon, Atlantic sturgeon, right? And what made you want to tackle them right now?
Oh, Atlantic sturgeon, they're just an amazing fish. I've been writing about them since the mid 1990s, and it's like every time I talk to folks about them, they're always learning something new. It's kind of weird to think that a fish that grows like many feet long and weighs hundreds of pounds, they're so obvious. You think that we would know everything about them, but we really don't. But they've been around for probably 100 million years. People call them the fish that swam with dinosaurs. In
Wow.
fact, they have like bone-like plates on them instead of scales. They're so old.
Yeah, Carl, their face is like very, it does look kind of like prehistoric. Like, how would you describe that?
Yeah, they have like pointy snouts and they really look like, these scutes, which are these plates on them, really kind of give them an armored look.
Whoa.
and and they're unique. They also just kind of are known for jumping out of the water for reasons people aren't really clear about, and so they're actually sometimes even kind of visible.
Oh, wow.
You said
So,
you've been covering them since the 1990s. Weren't they thought to have been like extirpated, not around in the Bay at some point?
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing because they once were really common. They were supported a major caviar industry, and back in like the early 1600s, Captain John Smith said there were more sturgeon around than could be devoured by dog and man, which is kind of a strange way to describe abundance. But the harvest of them were just amazing. And they were overfished in the 1800s and early 1900s for caviar. And because they don't reach maturity until they're about 10 years old, and they don't really produce, really as many eggs as some other fish do. It is hard for them to rebound from low levels. And then, there's pollution issues, dams restricting their access to habitat and stuff. By the early 1990s, people really thought they could be gone altogether from the bay, and that was reflected in like some of the first stories that I wrote.
Mhm.
But in fact, when people started looking, they did actually discover that there were some remnant populations around. They were found in the James and then the York, and more recently, they've been turning up apparently spawning on the Nanticoke in Maryland. And that may be just the beginning. They're kind of hard to, despite their size, they're kind of hard to find. And some of the scientists I spoke to think they could be in a lot of other spawning at a lot of other rivers, like the
So
Rappahannock, the Potomac, the the Patuxent, the Pocomoke, and even the Susquehanna are some places people mentioned where there could be some type of remnant populations.
So it sounds like they're making a comeback. What you said scientists are also learning more all the time. What's new here?
It's really interesting. There seems to be some evidence. In terms of gauging their abundance, it's a little bit hard to know if we're just better at looking for them or there are more of them. And people think there probably are more than there used to be, especially on the York River, where they've been able to do some population estimates. It seems like they're increasing. But there's a lot of things that they are learning. They think that they're living longer than they used to. People used to think they only lived like 60 years.
Yeah.
But
Still seems like a long time.
yeah,
Yeah.
but now they're thinking that they may actually live longer than 100 years. And it's
Oh
like
my
that
God.
long lifespan may be part of what's allowed them to hang on in some of these systems, even after their populations were really driven down. One of the things that continues to surprise people is most anadromous species, those that live primarily in the ocean but spawn in freshwater rivers, they spawn in the spring.
Oh,
And most of our sturgeon populations are spawning in the fall, which is really unusual. In fact, the first time I wrote that they thought sturgeon here might be spawning in the fall, there was some fisheries biologist in California who emailed me that people in the Chesapeake were just crazy if they thought that sturgeon spawned in the fall. But, in fact, it does turn out in most of these systems, they seem to be spawning in the fall. And people aren't sure exactly why that is. It could be that the spring spawning populations, because there are spring populations in some rivers too, that those spring populations may have been the ones that were really overfished. And
Hmm.
that kind of left the fall populations. And so that's one theory. Another theory is these are really ancient fish and their spawning habits, date back millions of years. Different populations may have queued into rivers. Distinct populations may have developed that queue towards springtime spawning versus fall time spawning. And recent genetics really shows that even the spring and fall spawning fish in rivers like the James aren't particularly closely related to each other genetically.
oh, what?
Yeah. So why
So,
do we talked about menhaden on this show before, forage fish, we've rockfish, of course, are important as a commercial fishery. I guess why do sturgeon matter?
Sturgeon matter, I think, because for a lot of reasons. One is they historically were a really big, their abundance really was great in the bay, but they're kind of a species, they're kind of a charismatic species. They look really unique because they do sometimes jump out of the river. You actually have a chance to see them. They're kind of unique. They do like clean water. And because of their longevity, they're kind of something that shows you're buying into a long-term project because, that they take a long time to come back and spawn, like 10 years or more. And it's kind of investing in the long-term future of these systems if you are, trying to protect and promote sturgeon. And they are listed as endangered, by the way.
and I,
But they do face, some threats. And the two top ones that people name as threatening them are there's a lot of concern that blue catfish are eating young sturgeon and sturgeon eggs and things because the spawning grounds for sturgeon overlap with a lot of blue catfish habitat. And the other thing that people are worried a lot about is ship strikes because sturgeon grow big, 5 feet, the largest one on record's like 14 feet. They're kind of large and are vulnerable to ship strikes. And there's a lot of concern about those. So even though there are signs of recovery, there's some real threats out there too.
And I may add, like, I think another thing that makes sturgeon really interesting and significant is like they are such an ancient species that live a long time. So in a way, it's kind of like looking into the bay's past, I guess. I don't know. Would you say that's fair to say, Karl?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. It is really, it's just an interesting species altogether. Its whole life history. And when you read historical anecdotes, there's just great stories about sturgeon. There's a story of during the Revolutionary War, one jumped out of the Potomac River and landed on, believe it was an American officer and broke his leg.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, they get
Most cost
huge.
us the war it did.
Yeah, and if you go back, Native Americans talk about demonstrating bravery by like staking themselves to a rope on the land and then trying to lasso a sturgeon and see if they could corral it and stuff. The stories about sturgeon over times are just really amazing, very different from other fish.
Well, if folks want to check out this story, it is in fact the cover story on our July-August edition. And we have heard from some folks. They were a little concerned about if that fish it's pictured out of the water in somebody's hands, but we're told that that fish is fine, by the way. You were saying, Karl, they do pretty good with catch and release.
Yeah, they're pretty durable fish for handling.
Yeah. So you can also read that story online at bayjournal.com. Thank you, Karl, for that. And next, let's take a look around what's going on elsewhere around the bay. And well, you're nestled right there in the center of it all in Richmond, Lauren. What do you have going on?
I got big drama. That's what I
Okay.
got. It's it's kind of wild. Yeah, just south of Richmond in Chesterfield County, there's a landfill. It's called the Shoesmith Brothers Inc. landfill, and it's kind of had some problems for a while, but the reason it's kind of like on everyone's minds here in Central Virginia is it's really on the brink of kind of a potential environmental catastrophe, in the words of the trustee who is now managing the landfill. So basically, what happened is the people who took it over in 2008, they have been trying to kind of keep the landfill profitable over time, but ran into roadblocks, such as they tried to expand it into the quarry nearby, which the county, Chesterfield County Board of Supervisors, did not allow for fear of contaminating the water table. And then the county also had kicked the landfill owners off their water treatment system because they were pumping more leachate, which is kind of like the liquid that accumulates and from decomposing material in landfills. They were sending that leachate to the water treatment plant, but it wasn't properly pre-treated, and it was like literally poisoning the microbes and the bugs that help clean the water in that water treatment plant. So then they had to kind of haul that off site, which is much more expensive to treat that leachate.
If I if I can go back a second, I guess
Yeah.
what strikes me right off the bat here is that I'm accustomed to landfills being, public entities, right? This is a privately owned landfill,
Yes, this is a private landfill.
and they accept like municipal waste, that sort of thing, like any other landfill would.
Yeah, they accepted waste mainly from the greater Richmond area including Chesterfield, I think.
And certainly public landfills have their own problems. So what's the state doing about it?
Yeah, so what's happening now, basically, so the owners, they stopped accepting more waste in 2022. Well, recently, the owners filed for bankruptcy. So now there's a whole bankruptcy case kind of unfolding. And what the state is left with is a landfill, which is, I think, $192 million in debt and needs 172 million to finish closing the landfill and to keep cleaning up the leachate and fixing all the repairs because the owners did not invest in keeping up the infrastructure. So Virginia DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, is putting out new regulations to make sure that, there's enough money in these financial assurance and bonds to make sure there will always be enough money to clean up the landfill for scenarios like this. But also the state legislature gave $10 million just for this project. So that's state money going to kind of clean up this mess, and that's enough money to last them through the year.
And
So,
what's the reaction you're hearing from, residents and the environmental community? Do they feel like, okay, they're in good hands now, or maybe not so much?
um, everyone's really concerned. The James River Association is definitely keeping an eye on it, and they're definitely reassured by the state money and the attention from state lawmakers, but it's going to take a lot of funding and resources to fix it. And then the county residents are extremely upset because they feel as if the county kind of let this situation devolve. The county tried to get authority to inspect and enforce the landfill, and because of Dillon Rural State, the county did not have the authority to do so, so that got denied. But county residents are saying, they should have been doing more after that. That shouldn't have just been the stopping point for them. So right now, there is no direct leachate going into Swift Creek, but it's currently being hauled off, although there are potentially some stormwater runoff because there are puddles of leachate on the site. But right now, there's no like health water fishing advisories.
This didn't happen overnight. As you say, years and years this built up, and it sounds like the regulators really, or whoever, county, state, really let down this community.
Yeah, right now I have a FOIA request to see, what was the correspondence between the landfill owners and the state. I mean, we have the violation letters, and the director of Department of Environmental Quality told me the owners were very non-responsive and did not try to clean up. But there's about like a period of 2 years of these violation letters where, what was being done in that time. So that's something I'm currently like really trying to get my hands on.
Hmm. All right.
But yeah,
Well, thank you, Lauren.
of course. So what's going on in your world, Jeremy? How's Maryland?
Hot. No,
Hot? Okay.
yeah, that, but also I've been reporting on some legislation that would change the way that restored oyster reefs are managed into the future. So right now the status quo is that when Maryland and Virginia restore oyster reefs to do their part under the Bay cleanup, those reefs are kept off limits from future harvesting, commercial harvests. And the idea there is that, scientifically, it's believed that they'll be healthier in the long run if they're left to their own devices. And also, they can help provide seed stock for other parts of the bay bottom for other oyster bars that can then be harvested. So there is still a benefit for, commercial watermen there.
Mhm.
What's new here is this rider that Congressman here in Maryland, Republican Andy Harris, has attached to a funding bill that would take those restored reefs and require them to be opened after 3 years to commercial watermen.
So are the reefs kind of like, under threat by this, or is it a really big boost for the watermen? Like, what are the consequences here?
This really highlights a long-standing rift in between, environmentalists and regulators on one side, and on the other side, watermen. And environmentalists and regulators say that keeping these reefs as sanctuaries is better in the long run, right? They've done some research, most recently one from University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, showing that it does appear that sanctuary reefs have more shell in them. More shell
Mhm.
means more place area for future baby oysters to attach themselves and grow. But that runs up against sort of the lived experience of watermen who say, hey, we're out here, we're dredging, that's how they get the oysters generally, is by having these big cages run behind their boats, and it scrapes the bottom and you stir it up, and that way, according to them, you keep the silt from building up on top of the oyster shells, and therefore fresh area for, future oysters
Yeah.
to latch onto the bottom. Well, so where
Mhm.
this stands now is
Yeah.
that it's gone through committee, this bill, and the question is whether or not the Senate, will take it up. And a similar bill was wending its way through Congress last year, and that part got stripped out in the Senate version and didn't see the light of day. But this is happening on a context that's evolving here, where oysters are certainly appear to be doing pretty well, at least compared to some other species like crabs. There are some other efforts around the bay that are looking at pairing restoration with direct commercial harvest. So there's a state project that's being funded in Maryland in the Eastern Bay. Half of it will be reopened for commercial harvest. And then there's a federal project in the Virginia waters in Pocomoke and Tangier Sounds. Half of that will be reopened to commercial harvest in the down the line. So, the camel's nose is getting under the tent here.
So do you think it'll pass? I mean, maybe you should have guessed, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. What are you thinking with the landscape?
Yeah, with Congress, it's always hard to say. I think the environment is more and more in its favor. At least the political environment is more in its favor. But environmentalists like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation continue to hammer this one pretty hard. They don't want to see this, and they're pretty united on that front.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thanks for bringing that to us.
Well, of course, this is all just the tip of the iceberg for what we're covering and what's available to you, dear readers and listeners. So you can always read more at bayjournal.com on these and other stories. And of course, find us in print if you want to subscribe. Of course, you do. Just go to bayjournal.com, look at the top right corner there, hit that subscribe button. And hey, subscribe to this show as well. It couldn't hurt. And give us a rate as well. All those stars. That's what we need, right?
Pretty please. Please and thank you.
Yeah.
Well, before y'all go, I was hoping we could, dear listeners and my contestants here, we could finish up with our two truths and a lie segment. So I have two truths for you, two Bay-related truths and one Bay-related lie. And as you know, you have to figure out which is which. And I should low-key be keeping track and see like who's kind of the all-time winner.
I think I'm 3 for 3 so far. Not
Yeah.
that I'm bragging, but yeah, I'm bragging.
Okay, cool. All right, so here we go. Statement A. The Chesapeake Bay holds about 15 billion gallons of water. Statement B, the bay has an average depth of 21 feet. C, pearls and oysters start as a grain of sand or parasite. So which one do you think is the lie?
So we've got 15 billion with a B gallons of water in the bay,
Mhm.
21 feet average depth in the bay, and then oyster pearls starting with a piece of grit.
Hmm.
I usually let the other guy go first, so I'm going to go first this time because I'm just so confident that 15 billion, I feel like that should be a T as in 15 trillion, so I'm going to go with A.
Yeah, Jeremy's right.
Oh.
Oh, those are my favorite words.
Mhm.
All right. Well, you're both correct. It's actually the bay actually holds 17 trillion gallons of water. I thought I could get you, but I mean that just goes to show like how massive the bay is. I don't even know like how to properly quantify that.
Yeah. Well, when you're off by an order of magnitude, I think me and Carl, we can handle that. No, that's interesting. And the thing about, how that's pretty shallow too, 21 average feet. And that's kind of why we're here. If the bay was deeper, we might not have the pollution problems that we have. There would be more dilution, but the fact is it's not very deep. So
Yeah.
dilution is not necessarily the solution to pollution.
Yeah,
Even though 17 trillion, that's a big number.
I never really thought about that.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. The Chesapeake Bay Journal newscast is a production of the Chesapeake Bay Journal, the Bay region's premier source for independent environmental news. Please remember to subscribe to the Chesapeake Bay Journal newscast wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you've heard, you can get even more journalism from the Bay Journal delivered right to your mailbox or your inbox. You can sign up for a free subscription at our website, bayjournal.com. This series is co-produced by Lauren Hines-Acosta and myself, Jeremy Cox. Our executive editor is Laura Lutz. For advertising information, you can contact Jackie Kane by email at jkane@bayjournal.com. That's JCAINE@bayjournal.com. Thanks for listening and see you next month.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.